What is your town's dark secret? Our town bank got robbed twice by a guy on a bicycle. Twice. Through the drive-through. The suspect was never found. The neighbors I grew up next to had a father who was molesting the oldest. It went on for many years and had even took her on trips to Disneyland, but was actually taking her to Mexico and was whoring her out. He was eventually discovered and arrested. The family had their own Dr. Phil episode. Meth. There's about 2 meth busts a year in a population of about 11,000 people, half of which are federal prisoners. Edit, the state is Michigan. A woman, after suffering years of abuse from her husband, finally snapped when she learned he also sexually assaulted their daughter. She killed him, chopped him up, spread him across farms and fed some of him to livestock. She served no time. The last I knew, was married to husband number 3, and was selling insurance. In 2008, our city's police department pressured a 23-year-old woman to act as a confidential informant in exchange for not being charged on drug charges. She was executed by the dealers while 20 police officers, and some DEA agents, were supposedly supervising the buy. City had to pay out $2.3 million to the family in the civil suit. Everyone fucks each other and wonders why they all have the same diseases. A local Chinese restaurant was owned by a married couple. They had 2 young girls. Most of their time was spent there as a family. One day a news report went out about one of the girls who went missing. We were asked to check sheds/outbuildings and check for footprints on our property. Police were searching everywhere, based on details given by the couple. A couple days later, if I'm remembering correctly, they finally searched the restaurant and found the missing girl in the freezer, beaten to death. Husband blamed the wife, wife took the blame. Husband escaped the police van escorting him to jail but didn't get far. Restaurant is now closed, and nothing has taken its place. I believe they just painted the windows/made it look like an extension of the other stores in that plaza. The Christian bookstore on one side of my street is used to launder money from the illegal gambling joint on the other side of my street. They get raided at least twice a year by the sheriff, but they are still operating. A family down the street from me had a daycare. They had only been there for a few years before the husband of the family was locked up for pedophilia. The small town I grew up in was once home to a serial killer, a woman who may have killed at least 42 people, though only 14 bodies were actually found, about 100 years ago. She may have died there, but it was suspected that she staged her own death and left town. They dug up bodies around her house afterwards, including those of her children. Police corruption. A local private investigator and former police detective would be hired by women divorcing their wealthy husbands. The PI would hire escorts as bait to flirt with the husbands at a local wine bar and get them drunk and ask to go home with them. Once they got in their car, the PI would tip off friends in the police department to pull them over for DUI. For the police, it provided the department lots of revenue. For the PI, he made lots of money, and for the women who hired him, arresting their husbands helped them gain more in their divorce. Made national headlines about 10 years ago. Famous serial killer here liked to dress up as a clown. Though it couldn't be proven, it's suspected he had accomplices that helped him. They may have gone out on their own. Robert the Bruce massacred a garrison of English soldiers here. City got sacked during the Jacobite uprisings. Romans killed a big army of Caledonians nearby, and there was that one time the head of a Highland clan rallied his clan and sacked it because he had a feud with it, but that's fine because another laird of that same clan got executed for trying to blow up the King of Scotland with a cannon. A different king to the one that blew himself up with a cannon. My grandparents, who initially built the house I'm in now about 20 years ago, for the first few years got their dial-up internet from some dude who ran his little ISP business out of an old barn. Apparently he also had a meth business. Meth is huge in this part of Wisconsin, and when he was apparently about to be busted, burned everything down, literally, and hung himself. I remember one weekend like 10 years ago when the internet just stopped working and never came back up. I guess that was the day he pulled the plug. The whole thing was in local papers a week later. A lot of swingers. Apparently. I can't find M and I've looked. While researching claims that the likes of Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Elvis, and Buddy Holly had played in a local dance hall in my hometown, total phooey, I discovered that my Canadian Prairie hometown had hosted a KKK convention in the 1920s when they were trying to expand into Canada. In 1992 the police killed 111 prisoners after a small fight between two of them. By order of the governor, they just released dogs in the place to kill everyone. No excuse was met except the lack of respect to their lives, and the man on charge was later re-elected using 111 as his ballot number, São Paulo, Brazil. One of our high school basketball players murdered his pregnant girlfriend. They never found her body, but there was enough evidence that everyone knew he did it. They finally arrested him for it recently. Not really a secret but goddamn dark. About 60 years ago a couple spent 2 years snatching children off the streets, murdering them and burying them on the nearby moors. They killed 5 children, and one body is still missing. I had a quick toilet stop while on a road trip from Perth to Geelong in Australia, and stopped at a place called Snowtown in SA. The lady who cleaned the toilets happened to be there, and without me saying a word, pointed out the vacant bank building where 8 bodies were found in barrels. I must admit that was going to be my next question. The bank building still stands and is opposite the public toilets. In a town close to where I live there was a guy that everyone hated, and rightfully so. He would do things to people's property like burn barns, shoot their dogs, vandalize public areas. But would always somehow get out of trouble for it. One day he rolled up to a common bar that many of the town folk would stay at and in midday was shot and killed by someone from the bar in the street. The cops all questioned the people around and every one of them said they were too busy playing pool. To this day no one knows who did it and the murder is still unsolved. I believe they even made a movie over it. Edit. Thanks to you/Addict who discovered the movie is in fact in broad daylight. Our scumbag MP went to the Caribbean for Christmas and pre-recorded a bunch of videos to look like he was at home. Wore sweaters and had a green screen in cabinet meetings. Our province is on lockdown at the moment due to COVID. We were all told to isolate and not celebrate with members outside our household, and this dude is on a beach. We are the embarrassment of the country. I did not vote for him. His office is in my town. Apparently the one and only strip club in my hometown was/is run by the Hells Angels. It happened in 2008 I think. I was a little child when I heard the news about it. There was a little restaurant/trattoria near the town I grew up in Peru. The dishes were mostly traditional, but it was popular because of its chic heron, which is basically fried pork skin or pork rinds. Really tasty. It was a family business. Turns out the main chef husband cheated on her, and she killed him, and instantly chopped the body and mixed many parts with the pre-seasoned pork meat. All this happened while the restaurant was working normally. The woman, killer, called the police some days later saying his husband never returned from the nearest city, but she got caught after some interrogation made by the police. She admitted it and told them where the rest of the body was. They would only bones and the hard parts like feet, head, etc. She used mostly the ribs and all the fatty parts. She said it would taste exactly like pork after seasoned. If I remember correctly, she is in a mental hospital now. P.S. We used to eat there many times, because it was in the middle of the road to go to the nearest zoo park. Thankfully we didn't during these months it happened. We know Malrite tastes terrible, but we continue to drink it just to see the reactions of the uninitiated. We have thousands of unmarked graves under lawns and buildings downtown. The site of our old library was the cemetery for the poorhouse and the jail. There's 4,500 unmarked graves in that area alone. In the late 2000s, our town police department was disbanded because the entire lot of them, including the chief, knew, and were hiding/covering up, the fact that one of their deputies was abusing his daughter. We haven't had a police department since, just contracted county sheriffs specific to our town. A strip joint was raided and some high-powered people were caught in huge illegal gambling activities in the back room. I was in the paper one day and nothing was ever heard about it since. No one was ever brought to trial. There was a teenager who shot a store manager for money. The guy managed a grocery store in town and was transferring money, like $13K, from there to the bank, and on his way out of the store this kid just walked up and shot him in broad daylight without even asking for the money, I believe. He was obviously caught and taken to prison, but then he escaped, somehow out of the back of a van, but I don't know why they'd be transporting him if he was already there. And I haven't seen this in the news, but rumor was he hid in the woods by a church and wore the choir robes. They found him and he pleaded guilty, so now he's in jail for life. He was only 17 and it was crazy to see a classmate become a murderer overnight. About 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years, different women have had their child sexually assaulted and/or murdered by their boyfriend. Mind you, this is a small Ohio town with only 1-2K people. In my town, it's rumored that the has basically buy up bars and clubs, then burn them down for insurance money. The same places have kept burning down year after year. In the early 80s, a prisoner escaped from the men's institution in town. After hiding out in a vacant house for 2 days in the next town over, he entered the house neighboring his hideout and murdered 4 out of the 5 people inside. One of the deceased was a kid that was there for a sleepover. The only person still alive is the 8-year-old son of the homeowners who survived having his throat cut. A really brutal crime for an area that at the time was a quiet suburban farming community. Our local Long John Silver's was a front for money laundering, LOL. Probably how high our rate of suicide attempts is. Little fun fact about Canada, our government has and continues to treat Indigenous people like shit. High poverty rates, alcoholism, assorted other addictions, and lack of access to services regarding these problems leads to ridiculously high rates of depression. Thankfully most attempts aren't successful, but we've had a number of suicide waves in the past. Usually this starts with a well-liked elder passing away. Oh, also the preferred method is hanging. A visitor might wonder why the soccer goals at the school on reserve doesn't have crossbars. Well, the unfortunate answer is about 5 attempts, including 1 success in a 1-month span after the new goals were put in. Years ago, a husband and wife were having a heated argument in their basement. In a fit of anger, the husband grabbed a billiard ball from the pool table and threw it at the wife. It hit her in the head and killed her instantly. The husband then dismembered her body in their upstairs bathroom, put the parts in garbage bags, and boated them out to the river. My great-aunt was a witness and saw him leave the dock with the garbage bags in his boat and return without them. A classmate of mine now lives in the home where it happened and says you can still see the scratches in the tub from the saw the husband used. Apparently Spring, Texas has a human trafficking problem. No one has found literal kids around there. I don't know why, and honestly I didn't really paid that much attention until I seen like kids I knew on parents' truck and saying we're still looking, and I was like stupidly shitty back then, and I thought to myself, yet she ain't coming back, dude. I think she's gone. And it's heartbreaking because now I'm older and I still see these people who are still clinging on to hope and desperation, and I think now, she might come back one day, they might find her. New information might pop up and I hope that they do find closure. My hometown was rumored to be a sunset town. There was a horn that sounded at dawn and dusk every day. Allegedly that was the signal for black people to enter and exit the town, but there were never any black people there anyway, so it's hard to know if it's true. 2 different serial killers have killed in my town. To set things straight, I don't live in a town, but what I'm referring to is my borough of Staten Island in New York City. Okay, the first was a pedophile/child murderer named Albert Fish who operated up and down the East Coast but committed 1 confirmed murder here but several more suspected. This was the 1920s, I think. The other was Andre Rand, a serial killer who killed 2 young girls in 1972. Not to mention the ongoing mob war. We had a much-loved and well-respected local priest who was removed from his post because a woman made her daughter lie that he abused her as an altar girl. And the reason she did it was so petty that it drew the ire of all the regular churchgoers and could have destroyed her daughter's career prospects. She admitted to lying to the police when they interviewed her away from her mother, which almost got her place in a local university rescinded. So my town I graduated from had a guy that claimed to be Jesse James in his journals. He left several detailed journals from his life as well as a lot of details and artifacts that could line up. I handled some of his guns for the museum in town a few years ago. And got to look at some of the letters and writings though that contact. He lived alone for a few decades on the edge of town, no job, no one really knew him. They did find about $2,000 in gold when they bulldozed his house a few years ago, so I guess maybe he was something? I don't know, it was about 100 years ago he died. My hometown had a weird habit for turning up dead bodies. It was on the edge of a riverbed on a significant bend, so when graves or just Indians floated downriver they got snagged there and buried in sediment, and they turn up every once in a while, usually home remodels or planting season. Weird, and everyone just kinda accepts that's just life there. I live in Ocala/Summerfield Fluid. I think you could probably Google the corruption around here freely. My town is London, so take your pick. I'm surrounded by former bomb sites, old plague pits, and I can walk to the Tower of London from my house. The church down the road displayed the heads of executed Jacobites on its railings, and the railings of the flats opposite it are reported to be repurposed stretchers from WW2. There's lots of current and historic organized crime, and the politicians are all bent. Very few people who go to one of my local parks know that an MP was found cruising for gay sex there, and it's also where Benjamin Franklin hung out, so I doubt it was the first fumble it's seen. There is a burial place where you end up if you know too much, and it's on tribal land, so cops can't investigate. I know people who are there and they can't investigate due to jurisdiction and tribal law. There's about 20 people buried there that will never see justice. I lived just around the corner from Ivan Milat. In his active years, didn't know until I was in my later teens, but I wasn't what he was hunting. The story of a young girl abducted by a man she met on social media, on her way to one of the 2 high schools in town, the one I went to. They never found her body but her clothes and bag, and evidence in his car. It was said he borrowed a wood chipper from a friend earlier that week. He was arrested at the local Safeway working a shift. The Safeway I went to growing up. Just really a mindfuck. A man in my town went by on Main Street. On Main Street there is a water tower. This man parks in the middle of an intersection blocking the main road. Then runs to this tower. BTW, it's a fake tower, it's just really for decoration. And then he climbed to the top and crawled inside. It took 3 weeks for the man to be found. He survived, which was nuts cause it was in a heat wave and it was a metal tower. But in the end they welded the tower lid shut. More of a legend than a secret. If you're a man, don't swim in the lake because the princess will take your life. Not really a secret, but when I was in elementary school a woman got shot and died in her house in the middle of the day. They put us on lockdown because she lived close to the school. They ended up shooting the guy that killed her, and I believe he died as well. It was her ex who came and shot her because she called the cops on him the night before for, I believe, stalking her. I hope her kids are doing okay.